And we'll get right forward into grazing.
Okay. When we went to some soil and water conservation people, oh my gosh. We had a cow by that time, and we had been conventionally grazing and running out of grass. You think, what are we going to do? And then we got introduced to this, and it's the key.
So roll back 10,000 years to the beginning of agriculture, and then roll back another few thousand years. Before man ever put a stick in the soil and planted a seed, we were managing livestock for meat and milk. That's because all food energy is solar energy. So the biggest solar energy capture we can do will give us the most food energy for our buck. 40% of the landmass of the world is covered with what we're going to call grass, but it's not necessarily going to be grass. Ground cover, not trees. 40% of the landmass of the world is covered with this marvelous, intricate, multi-leveled, multi-species thing we're going to call pasture, grass, forage. And it's catching almost all the light energy that falls on it. And it only has one problem, and that's that we can't eat it. So thousands of years ago, before we ever figured out about growing plants, as human beings, we said, how do we turn that stuff into people food? We don't. The animals are doing it for us. And we can hunt them and eat them. But if you want to feed a lot of people off of those animals, now we're going to start harvesting grass through the guts of a ruminant and turning it into milk that human beings, and not just human beings, but every other piece of livestock on the farm is able to benefit from the conversion of solar energy, grass, into protein, sugars, and fats in a cow's gut, becomes milk. That's going to feed the whole farm. So Grazing 101 for us is just giving you some science to give you a background on how grass-eating ruminants are your number one tool for turning whatever photons are falling on your piece of property into all the energy that's going to power the entire rest of the farm. Terminology: mob grazing, holistic grazing, management-intensive grazing. Rational grazing is the term that André Voisin, a French farmer back in the 40s, first applied to grazing, where we're using our brains and our powers of observation to help our animals harvest our forage, our grass, at the optimum time, so that one, they're going to get the most use out of it, and two, it's going to be there, and it's going to be better the next time they come around. I'm going to use the term rotational grazing. It's not the first time that term has been used, and it doesn't just apply to this. So you might go out and see a guy who's got his pastures chewed down to next to nothing, and he'll say, I'm rotational grazing because I got another field across the road and they're over there some of the time. They're rotating, right? That's not what I mean. I'm going to mean the terms mob grazing, management-intensive grazing. Those terms all mean rational grazing, using our ability to observe, plan, foresee, to make sure that our animals are harvesting their forage at an optimum time and in such a way that when they come back, there's going to be more and it's going to be better. And I don't know if there's even a limit to that, right? If there is, nobody's reached it yet. It just gets better. Rotational grazing is the practice of concentrating grazing animals in a small area for a short period of time and then giving that area an extended period of rest for regrowth and to send down deeper roots for the plants before the animals come back to graze again. So here's some of the science behind it so that you can stand back in awe the way I do. There's the obvious. A cow or a group of cows or sheep or goats or camels or what have you grazing a small area are going to trample it, they're going to manure it, and they're going to urinate on it. If you take them away for a month, that's all going to be turned into soil. It's going to feed soil life. It's going to add carbon and nitrogen to your soil. It's going to give those plants a chance to regrow. Our soil's better. And that's just the beginning. So we've created leaf litter. We don't have bare soil now. We just have chewed down forage with lots of leaf litter, which the earthworms and bugs and microbes are going to turn into soil, are going to turn into humus. We got manure. That's already got its microbes in it to turn it into humus. We've got urine, lots of nitrogen, with plenty of plant material to soak into. It's obvious that our soil is going to improve that way. But that's just the beginning. By grazing off the tops of the plants, our animals have now let sunlight get down to a lower level. If the plant that's been grazed is a bunch grass, that means, picture if you guys have orchard grass, fescue, grows up in a bunch. If that doesn't get grazed off, if that top growth isn't pruned, it will die. And then it'll sit there, and it's going to wait for chemical action to break it down. That takes a long time. If it gets pruned, and what's going to happen is all that dead stuff on top is going to shade out the little growth points down there at the crown that want to get up and get their share of sunlight, right? If it's grazed, now we've let sunlight down to their level, so our bunch grasses are going to grow in better. Legumes. A good pasture wants to have a fairly high percentage of legumes in it. But our legumes tend to be shorter than our bunch grasses and our forbs, our tall weeds with broad leaves. And so they tend to be shaded out in a pasture that isn't being managed well. But when we graze off the tops of our plants, now our percentage legume is going to go up in that pasture because now we got sunlight getting down to that next level of leaves. A pasture that you thought didn't have clover in it, the third time you come around the farm with your ruminant, you're going to say, my gosh, I never planted any clover here, and there it is. Your Dutch white clover is going to be coming in at the lower level. Medium red is going to be coming in higher up. Stuff you never planted that's been waiting in the soil seed bank is now coming in because you've let sunlight get down to that level. Because of that, in addition, now instead of having some bunch grass plants and some bare soil in between, we've grazed that off and applied litter, manure, and urine. And now the little short plants that could have been collecting solar energy, this is a great thing about a pasture, is we got solar energy collectors at every level here. We got our big tall grass plants, we got our forbs with their big palms out catching sunlight. But down here at the lower level, we want to have all those things that get called weeds, like bed straw, looks like trash, but your cow says it's dinner, if it's not the only thing she's got to eat. Clover, all those things that want to fill in down at the bottom are able to get sunlight down there, and now our bare soil is going to start to disappear. How many of you looked out across a pasture and said, boy, that looks green and full, and then walked out into the middle of it, and this could be a vacant lot, and looked down? Look, you never know what's in a pasture until you see it from above. And you've got bare soil in a bunch of spots. Those will start filling in, and they'll start filling in year number 1 when you're managing animals on it, especially if you have adequate rainfall throughout the year. As you guys generally, I'm not talking no dry spell in the summer, but not, like we're not living in a savanna where it rains hard for 2 months and there's no rain the rest of the year. A question?
Yes, when you say graze for a short while and then leave it alone for a long time.
We're going to come to those numbers. Right now I'm just introducing the science behind it. When we're grazing like that and we're applying litter and manure, which is from the leaves that were grazed, our roots are able to mine minerals down below the soil, down in the subsoil, where you don't reach it with your soil test. So your soil test is not necessarily going to give you good information on what's there. Those minerals being mined by your roots are going to come up through the leaves and get applied to the surface. You're going to start seeing your soil profile improve. I'm not suggesting you go out and get a fancy test done. You're going to see the results of an improved soil profile because of the improvement in your pasture right away. These are all these are the things that come from this heavy impact, short duration, long rest and recovery time. These are the things that are going to start improving right away. Another neat thing that you don't think about necessarily, those plants on top get sheared off, right? We know that that's adding organic material to the surface, but we're actually building more organic, we're adding more organic material below the surface than above, and here's why. A plant generally at the soil horizon has, whatever amount of mass it's got up above, it's generally got the same amount or a proportionate amount to actually be larger below the soil horizon. When it's sheared off, it experiences root dieback, so that the roots underneath the ground now are proportionate to what's on top of the ground, right? This is one of the reasons why you're not trying to take it too short, because a good root system is what's going to allow it to regrow. But when we take it down to, we're going to talk about what reasonable levels are, and we get that root dieback, we've just added organic matter under the soil, under the surface, pardon me, down in the soil, where it's available to microbes, fungus. We're going to talk a little bit about mycorrhizal relationships and how important funguses are in our soil. The little mushroom you see is just the fruiting body, but underneath there's miles of network down there that are passing water and minerals around and sharing them with your plants if you'll help them stay healthy. That root dieback feeds your funguses, it's feeding microbes, it's feeding worms, it's feeding insects. It's also creating passages in the soil, and now water and air can get down there, and new roots have an easy route down where those old roots were. So another benefit of intensive rotational grazing is that pulsing root dieback is pulsing carbon into your soil. If you're worried about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and you want to figure out how to get it out and put it somewhere stable, here's where it's going. It's going down into our soil to become humus. You can watch your soil bank grow in real time when you're intensive rotational grazing, when you're rotational grazing.
3 years, you will not believe.
The rule they say when you start intensively grazing is that every year for the first 3 years, you're just going to stand back in awe at the differences. And that has been absolutely our experience in multiple situations. Heavy impact in a small area followed by a long rest results in an increase of the density and the diversity of your forage community, of your grass community. Is going to result in stronger plants and more plant mass with a deeper root system. So now we're looking at a hydrology issue. You can go a lot longer between rainfalls when you've got a deep root system that's going down where the soil's staying damp. So you're going to build organic matter and hugely increase the fertility of the soil. Right away, that's going to cut down on the amount of cash that you need to spend to feed an animal on the farm. And that animal's going to cut down on the amount of cash you need to spend to feed yourself. This is the kind of relationship we want to find on the farm. How is the farm going to achieve a balance so that as few inputs have to come in from outside as possible? Secondary benefits of grazing. Harvesting water on your land is going to be just as necessary as harvesting sunlight. And good grass management hugely increases the amount of water your soil is going to hold. You're going to notice pretty quickly that across the fence, when the grass is browning out in the summer, yours isn't browning out nearly so fast. Secondary benefit to intensive rotational grazing, this may sound funny, but you got to get out there every day. So you're seeing your forage and you're seeing your animals every day. If you want to learn your land and you want to learn a natural system, time, commitment, just attention and listening are the best tools you've got in your pocket. And the fact that you have to go out and move fence every day, something that to a lot of people looks like work, drudgery, a downside, that's actually one of the pluses of intensive rotational grazing. If you're looking at livestock every day, we talked about the fact that stuff dies, but stuff dies a lot faster if you're not paying attention to it. When you're out there every day and you notice that that animal has a limp and you bring it down onto the flat for a few days until it gets over it, your likelihood of losing an animal on the steep place because she tripped and ended up not being able to get on her feet all night go way down. So attention, time, those are pluses. Those are upside, not downside of intensive rotational grazing. Seeing your land every day, you're going to be a whole lot more likely to learn things about it that are going to be useful to you. Like where's there a wet spot that's wet 12 months of the year? That's the place you're going to get in there with a shovel, not heavy equipment. You're going to put in a simple French drain system. Now you've got running water in your pasture because you were out there every day for a year and you saw, hey, water's always pooling in that spot. I can do something with it. It's going to teach you your patches of seasonal forage. So if your animals are just conventionally grazed, they'd go back and hit the best stuff at the optimum time. Pretty soon it's not going to be there. It's going to stop growing. You'll have stuff they don't like growing there. But because you're there, moving animals every day or every 2 days or every week, we'll let you start out easy. In the end, I hope you're down to every 24 hours or every 12 hours. But because you're there and you're moving your animals and you're seeing them all the time, you're also going to be seeing your land, and you're going to learn where the best spring grazing spot is, right? Where the best drought grazing spot is, where you're going to be happiest stockpiling forage for the winter because it's closest to where you've got running water. It's going to teach you to notice southern exposure, northern exposure, and the difference in the way grass grows and other things grow on a northern slope or a southern slope, or near a big rock or near a pond. All the different ways that you can start noticing what does your land want to do, because I guarantee you if you're trying to make it do what it doesn't want to do, it's going to win in the end. Being there, seeing what it's doing, living a farm lifestyle, the biggest gift that the choices we've made has given me over the years really has been that I belong to my land now. So my sense of being part of that pasture community and animal community sounds hokey until you're there. Then you go out in your field and you're at home there, and there's a piece there that nobody can sell you or describe to you, but I guarantee you it's going to be one of the things you're most grateful for 3 years down.
It's like homegrown tomatoes.
Yeah, or love, can't buy it. So the most successful rotational grazing does reflect that daily commitment of time. Not necessarily a lot of time. 15 minutes, 10 minutes, depends on how, the longest period of time is actually getting to the pasture and getting back.
We want people to farm. We want to encourage you to farm. We want you to find a way to farm. And sometimes I think, man, that sounds like a lot of time and a lot of work and it's not. Okay, so I've always had an off-farm job. I've always worked full-time. My wife has homeschooled 8 kids. We've always had meals. Yeah, full-time job. We've always had meals. We've always had that. And we find time to farm. So this is not something beyond you or your lifestyle.
We want to convince you that this is a lifestyle that you'd like, and that this might take away 15 minutes that you spent washing your town clothes or...
We don't have a TV.
This is time that you've already got in your day. Yes?
I think one of your keys to that you're demonstrating in your talk is how you're not overdoing it.
Right.
I think that's so key, so easy to do in the very beginning. You're really looking at, like you said, the family unit. How many people do we need to feed?
That's right.
How many animals do we actually need, and not overdoing it?
And the age-appropriate work, okay, so that we didn't get a cow and start, okay, so we know a couple that got a cow and they got it from us, and the mother is the only one that milks. And I think that's a disaster, because what happens when she gets the flu? Okay, because somebody's got to milk that cow. So we've got a handful of people that can milk, down to our 10-year-old who can milk. He doesn't milk as well as our 13-year-old. She milks better. But he can milk. And things have to be, in a certain sense, age appropriate. So jumping in and getting a cow and getting all this stuff when your oldest child is 7, I'd say slow down.
Might be although you can do a goat when your oldest child is 7.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
So what I want you to picture is that living web, thank you, living web, for giving me this term, that living web happening, and you're not there pushing, shoving, hauling. You're there observing and figuring out that if I move this piece over here, now the nutrients that I needed over here are going to happen there naturally. Or I know that seasonally this happens, so I'm going to make sure that the animal that can get the most benefit out of, say, windfalls in my orchard is there to get that benefit, right? And the amount of time you spend doing that isn't to be compared to time that you spend in your long commute, or time that you spend tapping the keys of the cash register, whatever. It's not work in that way. And I want you to picture the work that goes into just moving a paddock in a day as a very short period of time.
Yeah, we'll get much more detailed about paddocks.
Some of the things that somebody might consider a downside. So time. Most successful rotational grazing does reflect a commitment of time. You cannot artificially accelerate it. You cannot have an agreement with nature where you say, nature, I want you to do for me all that good stuff that I know you can do, but don't notice when I'm cheating by shoving a bunch of nitrogen in there to speed it up, or pouring Roundup where I where there are things growing that I don't like. Nature doesn't miss a beat, and you cannot outsmart her. Grass-fed animals do not develop at the same rate that grain-fed animals do. So when you put a baby Jersey bull on your back 5 acres, you can keep him back there, and he can do a beautiful job of turning grass into beef for you. And I don't know what they cost down here, but 5 years ago, you could pick them up for nothing in our neck of the woods. And even when beef prices went up, you could still get them for $75. So you can put a little guy out back, and he can be turning your grass into beef for you, but he's not going to do it at the rate the guy down the road who brings in a steer and shoves a half a bushel of grain in one end every day until it's 14, 18 months, and then sends it to the butcher. You're going to see that animal, and it's just huge. And you're going to go out back, and you're going to see your little grass-fed baby, right? And you bought a cheap bull, so he's a little Jersey guy, and he's never going to get that huge. And you're going to think, I must be doing something wrong. Plus, I feel like a fool if the guy comes on my place and he's like, how old is that animal? 8 months? He's like, oh, I thought it was born last week. You're going to have to live with the fact that things grow differently when we're not artificially accelerating them. So that's another downside, not really, of intensive rotational grazing is you've got to know that it works, know that your system is good, but it's not going to put any feathers in your cap with your vet or the guy down the road. Grass-fed animals should be, as far as possible, chemical-free, because anything you put in them comes out the back end and ends up on your soil. You put a parasiticide, a pour-on down the back of your animal, is going into your soil, and now whatever was in your soil that was there to naturally keep your parasites in check has got injected into its natural system a parasiticide. You can't play tricks on Mother Nature. She knows you're there. So I'm not saying you're never, ever going to medicate an animal. I think that's overdoing it. I think that's an extreme response, and you can watch some animals die in some pretty unpleasant ways if you insist on that, or you can put them down. But I am going to say, don't look at a mucky tail on your calf and think, my book says that's parasites, I better go get some ivermectin and pour it on him. No, this system will iron itself out if you are there to manage it for its health. And I am happy to say that at this point, I can walk out back. I'm not telling you I will never have a parasite problem, but I can walk out back and count 14 clean tails in March because I haven't medicated those animals. And our system is working the kinks out. Health is coming back, and health includes animal health, plant health, our health.
Our sheep have never been wormed.
Our sheep have never been wormed. Rotational grazing is built around electric fence. So you are looking at figuring out some way to power a fence line. You are looking at using a plastic-based fence line, probably some plastic posts. So if you're worried about your ecological impact, balance those plastics, which are going to last you, I might add, a long time. They do not biodegrade. They do not degrade in the sunlight very quickly, so they're going to last you a long time. But if you're looking for a downside, there it is. Another downside, we are not describing right now your ticket to a fat income. So you are going to be doing this work in the beginning for food, for love, for health, for growth of resilience, for your food security, but not necessarily for a big return in money. Yes, sir?
Do you ever find a circumstance where you need to aerate, plow, or amend the pasture?
We have never aerated, plowed, or amended. Grazing aerates, that root dieback. I don't want to plow it.
And the clay's not a problem?
No.
Well, I mean,
What do you call a problem? This year, when I first start grazing it, I may have a problem. If I have okay, so to give a specific example, on the convent where we farm, there was some earth moving done when they built the convent building, which left a shelf of really nasty subsoil right at the surface. I think somebody went out there, I think somebody on the crew went out there after it was built and just threw out they threw out Kentucky tall fescue, I think, which isn't a particularly good grazing grass, but it didn't take. So what's there now is that low-growing red briar that catches around your ankles when you try and walk through a pasture, and some weeds. That's what was growing there when we started grazing, and it was clay subsoil. Our remedy to that, which we'll go into more later, was to include that land in our rotations over the farm, But since there wasn't much growing there, we'd feed hay in that spot. Now we've added manure, waste hay, lots of carbon, lots of nitrogen. The seeds from the hay, and left those for a period of extended rest. That it's unrecognizable. It is not indistinguishable from the rest of the farm. But that land, in the 4 years that we've been grazing the sisters' land, that land is unrecognizable from what it was. So plowing, modern plowing anyway, includes a mold board that flips the soil over. Now I've reversed my soil horizon, so my topsoil is way down here. It's a good way to kill something, like, kill off roots of things. It's not a very good way to manage soil, and if you do it very often, you create hardpan. Subsoiling. I think subsoiling is a really cool idea, but because we're committed to small equipment or no equipment, and very little single-use equipment, we don't own a subsoiler. We've never used one. We haven't needed one. I like the things I'm reading about people who create a whole lot of soil really fast by subsoiling, grazing, subsoiling again. I think it sounds like a good science for improving really bad land quickly. But for what we're talking about, low expense, natural improvements, we have not needed to do any kind of tillage. When we first started grazing, which was about 10, 12 years ago, before that we were conventionally grazing. We were just putting an animal out there inside of a fence, and she ate what she liked, and pretty soon it was gone. And in July, we'd look out there and think, I wonder if she's got enough to eat, and throw her some bales. When we started intensive grazing, of course, we went out and we read things, and we looked on the internet for what people were doing, and there was Greg Judy doing this, and Gabe Brown doing that, and Joel Salatin doing something else. And we'd read it, and we'd rush home and do it, and it would work just fine. And the next time we referenced that website, they were doing something different. And we'd think, wait, we thought we were doing it right and we're doing it wrong. Wrong. There's two reasons for that. One is there's no right answer. 10 years ago when we were first learning intensive rotational grazing, it was kind of just beginning to reach the popular level, or maybe it wasn't quite at that point. People hadn't been doing it that long, and the way we helped, what we knew and the way we helped each other were really great. Because instead of pulling a bunch of statistics out of our back pockets, we were saying to each other, I tried this and it works, right? Any intensive rotational grazing, this is the best line I know, any intensive rotational grazing is good. There's no bad rotational grazing, just good and better. Right? So I didn't do it wrong. I did it different. So when you go out there and you look and you say, oh my gosh, I'm putting my animals out on 7-inch forage and they're taking it down to 3 inches, and I know that so-and-so says 8 inches to 4 inches. I'm doing it wrong. I'm hurting my property. No, you're doing good things. There's no one rule, and that's the only one that works, right? The reason why we're reading people saying, in 2015 they say X, and in 2016 they say Y, is that when you start grazing, the first thing that's going to happen is everything's going to change. And it's going to keep changing a lot for the first few years. So when you first start grazing, you've got bunch grasses with a lot of bare soil in between. You're going to graze one way. Your paddocks are going to be bigger. You're going to be feeding hay in the paddock to add some food and some organic matter. Next year, your forage is filling in. You're going to do it differently, aren't you? Because it's going to look different. So when you go out and you do more research into intensive rotational grazing, what you'll find is there is a wide variation in method. And the important thing to hang on to is small area, heavy impact, long rest, and it's not just a timing rest, it's a regrowth rest, right? And as long as you are doing that, nobody's set of rules can make what you're doing wrong. It's great, and it's going to change over the years. So you're going to describe it differently 2 years from now than you would describe it right now.
Okay, so there's our youngest.
He's about 7.
Yes, he's a little older now. And that's when he's setting up fences for rotational grazing. So anybody can do it. It's very simple. Our daughters, who who are 16 and 13 manage the sheep completely on our property. They move them through the paddocks and everything. They do it all themselves. But what I wanted to talk about is getting started. So how do I get started? How can I start doing this rotational grazing? First thing we would say is that any area of well-grown forage will be possible. Okay, so it can be canes, brush, grass, anything that's out there. Now, if it's a golf course short, no, that won't work. You'll have to wait till it grows up before you start grazing your animals. But anything that comes up is potential. You just have to find the right animal to match that forage. And we also think no space is too small. Simply adjust the number and the type of animals to the amount of forage. So we have a new piece of land, I already mentioned it, that has riverweed growing crazy, and we put the sheep in it and just couldn't believe it. Japanese knotweed, and they just absolutely loved it. And it can be down to a really small. So we also have on this piece of land, we've also got a little chicken tractor that only holds about 3 chickens. Move it every 24 hours. Maybe that's all you're going to try and do rotational grazing.
Great way to improve the garden side.
You have 2 acres or you have 1 acre, you're going to put a sheep on it. Okay, and you're going to use that sheep and run that sheep around. Sheep are really flexible. Goats really need briars and stuff like that, but sheep can go between the grass and the other.
Their milk makes the best cheese going.
I wanted to run through a few simple possible ideas. So the first one would be, okay, I have no fencing. Okay, I've got some property. Lots of unknowns. I want to keep my investments low, so I'm a little bit skeptical of this kind of stuff. So I would say tether a goat or tether a sheep. And keep or cow, and then just keep that animal moving. Okay? Yeah.
Would one animal get lonely?
Are you going to visit it every day?
Yeah. Maybe twice a day.
Do you have a cat or a dog?
Yes.
And chickens?
We ran 1 cow for a very long time, but we were out there frequently with it. We were milking it twice a day, and as my wife won't let you just run a beef animal, you have to have a ruminant that you have to get milk.
I think the answer to that is that herd animals do like to be with one another, but animals are not nearly as speciesist as humans. They're really aware of being in a living environment. So if I take a pig and I shut him alone in a concrete floored, closed walls pen, he's in solitary confinement. But if he's in a pen where my chickens are pecking around outside, flying over the fence to peck through things, he's not by himself anymore. And he knows it.
Yes.
What about starting with chickens? You are getting an egg, you are getting their manure.
It's a huge good thing.
Yeah, great.
Instead of a ruminant.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
Right. We're going to talk a little bit about the fact that poultry, because their feed requirements, if you're going to have the numbers people usually do, are what they are. They tend to need grain no matter what. They are, in some ways, the least farm-fed animal on most natural farms.
Efficient. Yeah.
Unless you're raising grain, and we'll talk about raising grain later in the gardening section, you're probably bringing in feed for them. But rotating chickens over a pasture is a terrific way to improve it. And if that's what you've got, go for it. We use them all the time.
Yeah, the thing that we love about the cow, okay, so it's got a big investment up front. I've got to buy this cow. After that, it's free.
She costs you nothing.
Okay, because I've got it on grass all year round, especially in the goat. Okay, I may have to buy some mineral, I may have to buy a few things, but it's free. And we find the vet, we have to bring in the vet to do a preg check. That's it. We don't have vet problems when you've got an animal on that. Okay, so a second method, okay, so this first method is I don't have fence, I'm just going to tether that animal. Oh, sorry, I want a couple of other thoughts about that. I want to move that animal, so when it eats the grass down, don't let it get the grass down too low, okay, then move it to another location, then move it to another location, and try and not get back to that first location for 30 days. Okay, 30 days is kind of the minimum, at least of where we are, that the grass will grow back. One thing that we look at is those grass tips. They're going to chew off that grass tip. You know that grass is ready to be harvested again when those grass tips have grown back. Okay, when it's gone to about 8 inches. Okay, I can bring that animal back to it again.
Again, when it comes to numbers, there are no numbers, but you guys need a number to aim at. So we're going to give you some numbers to aim at, and then you're going to pay attention and see what really works.
It's going to take you 15 minutes once or twice a day. That's all
Max.
it's going to take. Okay, and maybe you're not going to move them every day, although it'd be better. Joel Salatin says, people come to me and they say, okay, so I've been rotationally grazing. And he said, are you moving them every day? And they say, no. And he said, I don't want to talk to you. He says, I only want to talk to you when you've been moving them every day. Okay, so our lactating cows, we move every 12 hours. Move them every 12 hours. Our meat cow, the other cows, we move every 24 hours. Yep.
How big is the size of this area that you...
Okay, we're going to talk about that because that's always a big problem. How big of an area are we talking about?
The goats and brambles, try to get rid of the brambles. Do you leave them there a little bit longer to go ahead and eat them all the way down?
That's an excellent question. So intensive grazing is a tool. We're going to talk a lot about using it as a tool to improve your ground cover, to improve your forage. But it's a tool that you can use to get rid of stuff too. And we will go back to that. This lady's question, if you're grazing goats on briars, if you want to keep those briars, you need to get the goats away and let it regrow. But if what you're after is to kill them, graze the goats on the briars, move them on to the next set. As soon as these first ones start to grow back, bring the goats back and let them hit it again. Every time it starts to recover, hit it again. So it's a tool, and you use it in different ways depending on what the outcome is.
Now, it's possible that I want to keep goats, and then I may not want to take them all the way down. I want that to keep coming back. But what the problem with goats is you have a goat, it does its job well, and then it's out of a job, because it will not eat grass well. But the pastures are getting better, so now I've moved from goat to now I've moved to maybe sheep or to cow. So I'm changing my animals as the forage is changing as well.
Or you keep your goat in proportion to your farm and its needs. I mean, my farm would carry one goat pretty much from now till eternity just to keep certain things under control, right? I could tether that goat to eliminate briars in one area. About the time I got it done, they'd be popping up their ugly heads in another area, and I could start grazing over there. I couldn't do that with 10 goats because they would eat their way out of a job.
Do you have rhododendrons up there? I'm curious about.
We do. We have sheep laurel on our land. We have rhododendron.
Is there a permit for that thing?
You trying to get rid of it?
Well, there's just like an abundance of it on my property.
I want you to go do your research because of the little bit I know about sheep laurel is one, that I have it and I have sheep where it is and it hasn't hurt them, but two, that if I look at a book it says that it's toxic. Now, when you read something that says a forage is toxic, you don't know yet. You don't know yet. We'll talk about toxic forages later. But I want you to think to yourself when you read about like, this will kill your animal, this is toxic, ask yourself how they figured it out, right? Sometimes it's correct. We'll get to this. Sometimes it's correct, sometimes it's not. But that's my answer to can you graze it is I have read that it's toxic.
Okay, so that 15 minutes, as I said, 2 times a day, you're moving your animal. You're also refilling the water. Okay, you got to do that. You're maybe adding minerals or something like that. So there's a little bit to be done, but it's not very much. And you've got to be aware of shelter. Okay, so if it's hot, I may need to get it closer to some woods or something like that, or I may even have a little shed that I use. So those are things. We're going to talk about the elements of a paddock later on. Okay, so those are things to know about. So the second method is that I've been conventionally grazing. Okay, so I've got exterior fence like this. Okay, and now I want to start rotationally grazing. Okay, so what I would recommend is I put in, and I would say temporary fence that does that. Okay, so I know there's a YouTube video out there about a guy and he's really excited about it and they're doing rotational grazing, and every Saturday he goes out and he moves his animals to a different paddock. Okay, so if I do that and I leave them in for a week, okay, and by the time I'm getting around again, this one's got a pretty long rest. Okay, not ideal, and all I've had to do was I added that. And now I'm moving out, okay? Because again, what we want to do is get you thinking, oh, I could do that, okay? I could put an animal on tether. I could put that. That's what we want you to think about is it's as simple as that to start, okay? Then we've got a friend who we put cows on his place, and he has something that's much closer to what my dad did kind of rotational grazing. It was using the metal posts, okay, like this, with the electric fence wire like that, okay? Now the problem with this stuff is you set it up and it's pretty permanent, okay? So you're running this through these insulators and it's hot wire, but it's really hard to move it and stuff like that. Now Joel uses these for moving it and he pounds them in the ground and stuff. We're going to talk about these, which make it much simpler. But that's one possible way to do it, and that's what this guy does. So he's got very large paddocks.
This was strip mined, absolute mountaintop removal strip mined when he bought it.
So it's very steep as well, but he's put in either this or he's put in some other fencing. His fencing changes a little bit. You see some of the fencing there.
He started with 8 paddocks. He has Navajo churros, and then half the year he also has a couple of our steers. And he would just put the animals in, check on them every day. When it looked kind of chewed down, he'd move them on. And he went from that first picture, bare soil and rocks. This is like 2 years into it. Now, again, you can't know a pasture until you walk out, stand in the middle of it, and look down. But there's no bare soil except for in a few steep places in here.
These are permanent paddocks. So he's not changing the size or shape of them. This is what he is. And he's got gates. So he opens up the gate and he moves them to the next one. And he's got water that he moves around for each paddock. So this is, again, low maintenance, fairly easy. He probably, what did you say, 2 weeks?
Yeah, about every 2 weeks he'd move. So every 2 weeks he opened a gate. Not very difficult, not time consuming.
But eventually they learn when you open the gate.
Oh my gosh.
But
it's like the
dogs-
dairy cows. They learn
Now,
fast.
the dairy cows I get because they have a purpose,
Yes.
they have a reason to move.
Right.
But other animals, you know, the grass is always greener, but still, do you use dog, do you use?
No, we don't use anything to move animals.
They're usually standing at the gate.
If you guys move to 24 hours eventually, and we're hoping sooner than later, this is not, if you didn't want to live on that land and be out on it, you wouldn't have started this. So if you're walking out and moving fence every day, your animals have got internal clocks. They're going to be expecting you. If you have an animal that doesn't know you're coming, the likelihood that they're going to either break out or refuse to move when you want them to move goes up a lot. But if they're accustomed to seeing you coming every day, every second day, or even every Saturday, and they know that gate's going to open and they're moving forward.
Briefly, we have an aerial video that shows the rotational grazing, and they are lined up waiting.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Check out that Living Web video.
Yeah.
When you've got a situation like this,
Yes.
and for instance, the gentleman moves the cows to the next
Yes.
paddock, or maybe at the very beginning when you're trying to understand
Yes.
your grazing pattern that's best. If there's leftover forage in there, perhaps unwanted things, the less appealing things, do you ever recommend going in and getting it mowed down for the purposes of getting it back, just to finish it and be complete?
We talk a little bit about pasture management, maybe, if we get to that point. I don't know if we're going to have time. But yes, with pasture management, sometimes we'll go in and clip, is what they call it, and it's clipping high, okay? You do not want to clip any lower than the animals are taking it down. So you might just, all right, so there may be some big places, so I want to just even it out. So Bob Hendershot, who is the expert from Ohio State University, says the only reason to clip is vanity and revenge. Yes, we have done some clipping to bring it back down, partly because we're on the sister's pasture, and we want to make it look, so it's an aesthetic thing a little bit. I don't think that it's necessary to do, and I think that clipping, I think when we don't clip, the pastures do better.
I got to say that in general we find clipping is unnecessary, but I think Bob's rule is for cattlemen on established pastures. When you come into a place that hasn't been managed well, for example, suppose some of you, we have a couple that we're consulting with right now who are moving on to land that has been in crops, right? And they're trying to bring it to pasture. Then all bets are off, and you may want to go in and clip not just for aesthetics, not just vanity or revenge, but because you're trying to move your soil to a more complete ground cover, leaves at every level, and then you might want to clip. And if you're trying to get rid of something, I'll take an hoe and he'll take a weed eater, and we'll go out and chop at ground level if there's something we want to get rid of.
Yeah, the multifloral rows I will hit that way. Yep.
Can you mix the animals? Can they all live together?
Oh yeah, we think mixed grazing is the way to go.
Yeah, with limits. We'll talk about it.
We've gone to a lot of different rotational grazings, and especially when you're with the big guys, with the commercial guys, they'll tell you all the things that you have to have, okay? So you have to have high tensile perimeter fence. Nope. You have to have pressurized in-ground water systems. Nope. High-powered superchargers, we would say nope. Seed drill, huge tractor, pasture grass seeds, four-wheeler, no.
No. He always tries to get that one in there. Yeah.
Okay. Those are all things you do not have to do this, okay? So what is it that you do need to have? Well, I like using this kind of fencing with this wire, and we use 14 gauge. There's a 16 gauge wire out there. I would not recommend because it just breaks too easily and stuff like that. So the 14 gauge sometimes is a little bit harder to mess with, but it's a better wire, okay? And the galvanized, I think that's
right. This is galvanized. The aluminum tends to be more brittle, so if you're going to do a lot of work
you do not want to mix wires, okay? So we get wires given to us from different people, and we started putting the aluminum and that, and they don't. There's problems. They don't conduct well. Yeah.
And this stuff will actually burn through in places if you've got a spark that's jumping across over and over again.
So if I know that I'm going to have a place where I'm going to keep the fences for a long time, I might put this. But I would not do this, definitely not in the first year. I would not do it the first year I was rotationally grazing, okay? Because I don't know where the fences need to be. But eventually, along places where you've got a shift in the topography, I might start putting those. We've got very steep land, and we were putting our regular step-in posts, I'll show you those in a minute, up on this property and moving those around. And really the girls were taking care of it. My daughters were taking care of it. It was a chore to climb that hill frequently to do that. So we finally broke up the hillsides with this, okay? So now we have semi-permanent fencing that breaks up those hillsides, and all the girls have to do is move them from paddock to paddock. But that's only the hillsides. All the lower stuff that's flat, okay, we use the...
So what Shawn's talking about is taking line fence like that, and where our land does this, right? And we're wanting to make pastures. This is a little steep, but still, it's not that far off from ours, right? And where we're going to want to make pastures, we're going to run a line fence along this line. I'm not drawing this well, but imagine it coming toward you and going away from you. Another line fence here, another line fence up here, right? And that's just so that as our animals are traveling on this, it saves us a lot of hiking up and down if we can just break our land up into narrower sections. But it also means that our animals aren't hiking up and down here and creating trails going up and down, which are now going to carry water and soil off of our pasture. Yes, Rachel? That's right. I didn't draw it well, but basically everywhere where you've got a serious break in the topography, we've got a line fence to separate that.
Okay, so what we really recommend are these step-in posts. So these are plastic. They also have a fiberglass.
These are fiberglass. That one's plastic, this one's fiberglass.
Oh, because I keep hearing about fiberglass and the problem that it flakes off, and then you grab it and you get all these fiberglass.
You buy a cheap fiberglass post, and 2 years from now it's going to hurt you.
We have no fiberglass problems with these. I thought they were plastic.
These are from Ken Cove in Pennsylvania. They're American-made, and they stand up really well to use. There are other places. The stuff that's coming out of New Zealand and Australia tends to be high quality. But if you go to the farm store, you go to like Tractor Supply, and buy these, 2 years from now you have fiberglass splinters in your hand.
Yeah. When the ground's frozen, do you have any trouble putting it in the ground?
Yeah.
Good question.
And that's when we move to, these are the other posts that we have, okay? So these posts will have a tendency in the cold to snap off the little things there, but then we just wrap it around, okay? So we have not really, we're still very happy with these. We really like these. These are the O'Briens, and they've got this metal tip on them. So they really go in. The other thing that's amazing about these puppies is you can do that, okay? These, we have never had anything break on these, okay? No matter how cold it was. So these we really like. Now the problem is with these is that you're running wire through them and they have a tendency to bend.
If you use this as a corner, right now we've got pressure, now we have a vector going in a direction. It's going to bend it over. So we tend to use these. Vector has 2 syllables. So at corners we tend to use these because they're going to stand up to pressure. In a small paddock, it doesn't matter. There's not going to be that much pull. You saw in the picture where my son was hanging it on a fence. Hang a big reel on these white posts, it's going to bow over and let your reel touch the ground. Now you've got now you're grounded. Your fence is grounded. You got your power is going into the ground. So these are better for hanging a reel on because they'll stand up under the weight.
Okay, so with the freezing, so we usually can get these down if we work them a lot. And with these, what you do is you take an electric drill with a concrete bit, and you just run that down in the ground, and then you can put.
Some years, 3, 4, 5 weeks, I've got to carry my cordless drill and my masonry bit to set posts. This year it was like 2 weeks. When the ground starts to freeze, it's actually a boon. It holds those posts up even better than normal. It's only when it gets really frozen for a long time it gets to be difficult.
If you take the O'Brien, the white one there, and take it to shop and sharpen,
Yeah.
Okay.
that will make.
There's a good thought. So this gentleman said sharpen the tip of your O'Brien and you'll be able to drive it better, and that's true.
Okay, so these posts are just great. I really like them. Those two are the majority of what we use. For starting off, I think if you started off with about 50 posts, you'd probably be able to do what you needed to do. You're also going to need a charger, okay? And again, there are lots of chargers out there. We are not electric fence experts. The place I like to go is a place called Wellscroft. It's out of Massachusetts or something like that with a catalog. The catalog is very clear in describing what you might need. And he does, I think twice a year, he does a big just show and tell. And he shows you all the things about doing these. So there's lots of these different chargers out there. These are the ones we get from Kenco. This is a plug-in. It also could be solar if you wanted it to be. These are done by the joule. That's how much charge it's kicking. Yeah. Okay, so there's 1, 2. They go up to super high joules. Right. We use the 1s and 2s. I think all we have is 1s and 2s. Okay. Here is the thing that makes the rotational grazing work. Okay, is the reel and the twine. So this, instead of this stiff wire, which is what my dad had which we had permanent, this is this, and it's got metal built into it, okay, woven into it. And so you can reel it up. So I can make my paddocks any size, any shape, and we're going to talk a little bit about, what would make those demands. But I can do anything that I want with that. So this is what makes rotational grazing work nowadays. Okay, is this system.
We'd call it polytwine. That probably came from Kenco. It's got different names. People use
We'll have to
it.
do research because this
Right.
this is the kind of stuff that's changing all the time.
The
now.
big differences in polytwine, you can spend a lot or a little money. The big differences are going to be
How many metal pieces?
how many metal strands? 3, 6, 9. Is it steel or is it aluminum? Aluminum's more brittle, but it conducts better. Steel will last longer. How UV resistant is the plastic? Is it braided or woven? I would encourage you to go with lightweight. Don't sweat the small stuff here. If you get the heavy duty stuff, you think, boy, I'm doing this right, and then you're also going to carry it around, and it's heavy, and less fits on a reel. On the other hand, you're not going to be making enormous paddocks, so you don't need as much to fit on a reel.
Braid lasts longer.
Yeah, braid does tend to
now they
last
say the
longer.
braid lasts longer.
But I've had my initial roll of polytwine for 10 years, and I'm just getting to the point where I'm thinking, maybe I need to cut off the first 200 feet that has been used most and throw it out.
The other thing is that this stuff, if it breaks, you just tie it back together. Now, what they do is they tie it in the center, and then they tie so that you're getting as much contact as you can. So extend the tie as much as you can. But that's all you do. You just tie it back
We have
together.
a lot of tricks that apply to using fence like this in our book that I know we won't have time to go into right now, but this stuff is highly versatile. And if you check out our book and just see how to mend it, how to set it up, how to
So
make
there are
multiple strand fences with it.
Smaller reels. There's also, a lot of people use electric wire.
This is a simple way to set up
a.
a 3-strand fence, only this is all, oh, there we go.
Not as
So this isn't as purpose as as obvious. There we go.
There you go.
So I can set one post, run this down, carrying it between my fingers, hook it up on multiple posts, and when I get to the end, tie it off, or use a double alligator clip to hook it up. You'll find those in catalogs that sell fencing material. And this lets me set up a 3-strand fence, which I'd only have to use if I was grazing sheep with lambs, and I was afraid my lambs were going to get out. I never have to use 3 strands or anything else.
You know, there's netting out there. There's super smart fence that has something
Has
like
posts
that,
and reels
which is
and
expensive.
slip
Just go out
geared.
there and look. Okay, and that stuff's changing all the time now. So it is something that's worth looking at.
Your regular post, 8 to 10 feet. How far apart do you put these?
If I was training an animal, I'd put them pretty close together. But once my animals know it, I'll walk 15 steps, which is about 35 feet, and put out posts. Sometimes I'll go 20, depends on how much pressure I think they're going to put on that fence. So 50 posts, if you've only got a couple acres, 50 posts is overkill, you know. But 2 reels is a minimum, because when you're moving animals, you need a paddock built and the paddock they're already in, so you're going to be...
Okay, so there are a couple of other things. You have to have a ground rod, and the ground rod is here.
At least one, maybe more.
That's where they say the big problem is. If you're not getting a charge to your animals, it usually has something to do with the grounding. And they'll explain that in the catalogs. Again, I don't know all of that. So this one is done with solar, okay, with a battery, so that it stays out there. Almost everything we do now is plug-in.
You can buy a solar charger now that comes in a nice little case with the battery inside. This is our jury-rigged version, which suits us real well.
And I think you could get everything that you needed to get you started, $500 in that ballpark.
That's generous. You probably get it for less too, depends. We like to say there are 6 elements to a good paddock: grass, water, minerals. You got to assume that your soil is mineral depleted and your animals are at least going to need salt, probably a mineral block. Shade or shelter, seasonally, not always. A hot fence, hot's important. Many an animal gets out if you forget to flip that fence on. And then 6th element is the animal to do the grazing. So in almost anything can be grazed. Multiflora rose, greenbrier, you can put out goats. Lots of forbs, like say Canada thistle is a problem where we come from, y'all get that. Sheep will graze that down, so will cows. Japanese knotweed, we've said our sheep will eat that. It does need to have some significant height on it. If you're planning on grazing a field that you've been mowing up till now, let it grow a bit before you put them out there, because you want enough forage and enough root mass underneath the forage that when your animals graze it off, it's got 30 days to regrow before you come back. 30 days being an arbitrary number, but still a good number to work from. I'm going to throw out another arbitrary number. During periods of active growth, which around here would probably be like March through November, assume that plants regrow in 3 days. And that new, pretty light green stuff that's coming in is so much more attractive to your animals that they're going to come back in 3 days and graze the plant they grazed 3 days ago if you haven't moved them on. So although we would encourage you, if you can only stand to move them once a week, do it. It's good. When you get a little further into it, think of your maximum stay in any paddock as being 3 days during the seasons of active growth, because one of the cardinal rules of intensive rotational grazing is called no second bite. And it just means if they've grazed it once, they should not be able to come back to that and graze the new little growth tips when they start to come in. Question?
What percentage of forest understory could an animal accommodate that doesn't have pasture grass, but does have shade, the water, the other?
Yeah, big question. So how large would a forest paddock have to be? I'm afraid I can't address that one much, because although we do graze in the forest, we graze in the wood's edge, partly for browse, which is like bush leaves, witch hazel kind of stuff that gives the animals a mineral boost that they're not getting from our pasture grass. And we're grazing the edge of the woods partly because it's shade, which is the maximum amount of shelter our cows need in almost any season. We will talk a little bit about forest grazing when we're talking about toxic forages, but I can't tell you how much nutritional value to expect a grazing animal to get in the woods. So forage, number one. Water, second. It's good with intensive, you can intensively graze with a bucket of water in the pasture with the animal. Check it often. They're going to knock it over. You can also do it by walking them to water. If you've got one tank and it's the only source, you can walk them over there twice a day. They will be okay that way as long as in hot weather they've also got shade.
Here is a picture of that rough forage.
I don't know if you can see how steep this is, but it's like a 45-degree angle. And this is the kind of garbage that we would say, go right ahead and graze that.
Absolutely.
Now, don't take a cow that has been on an all-grain diet and shove her out on that and expect her to do well, right? But you could take a young animal that's grown up on forage and started on this, or an older animal that's been on forage.
Goats and sheep would love that.
Right, so this is an example of just how bad it can look. That's for the forage section of our 6 elements: grass, water, mineral, shade, hot fence, and an animal. Okay, water. So here's a half barrel is plumbed with some kind of a float valve. This is a Hudson valve. In this case, you can't see it. We'll be doing this tomorrow, more in depth into water valves. And this travels with her in the paddock. I can dump that, pull it into the next paddock, or I'll build 4 paddocks where they can all water from that tank in one place, you know, that's in the corner. Here's my water tank, right? But I can dump that and move that in 2 minutes. That, in this case, is going back either to an IBC, one of these big plastic cubes full of water that's catching water from one of our springs or seeps that we've improved, or it's going back to a running spring. But this provides running water in the paddock.
Okay, so we have lots of different versions of this, and as the water goes up, it does that and shuts it off. So it's like a toilet, but it keeps the water in front of them, and we don't have to go out there and keep giving them water. This gives them water.
Right, right. Okay, minerals. Grass, we got grass, water, minerals. Get yourself a brown salt block. If you're running sheep, check the copper content because sheep can't handle copper. Shelter or shade. Animals live outside. When somebody comes up to you and says, your poor cow's out there in the rain, you need to know that that's okay with your cow. It's not hurting your cow. Circumstances where we in Ohio, zone 6, it drops down to -10, -15 sometimes at night in the winter. Most of the time, our animals are just in the field. In the winter, if the wind's up, or if we're going to get a really big snowstorm, or if it's above freezing but it's going to drop below freezing and it's raining right now, we're going to give our animals either access to the edge of the woods, usually back in. I'm not going to give them something that backs to the east if the wind's out of the west. I'm going to put them where they can have some shelter from the wind. Or we do have a 3-sided shed on one pasture where for a very small number of days out of the year, we will run the animals over there and feed them hay if we know it's going to be really bad. We're not cruel, we just know they're animals, and they like the pasture. Sure, if you give them a cozy bed on hay in the barn, they'll take it, but only do it if that's what you want them to do, because they can learn that trick really quick, and then they'll stand there looking at you at the fence. Aren't you going to put me in the barn, right? And cow psychology is something to study, because they know exactly how easy you can make it for them, and they'll give you 2-3 days to think about it. Aren't you going to do that for us until you prove you're not? Then you got to move your manure. So there's your shelter, charged fence. Shawn's already talked about fence. Make sure you remember to flip it on. And then the animal. Match your animal to your forage. Match your animal to your topography. Think about what they eat. Briars or goats. Young locust trees, goats. Sheep and cows will eat some of that, but not that much. Sheep will eat forbs. That's broadleaf weeds more than a cow will. And they're all 3 good for grass, but I'd put sheep and cows out where I needed grass to be grazed. If it's steep, we find that short-legged breeds like the Dexters do are right on steep, but there's nothing like a sheep or a goat for going on your steep land. And we've got steep land that was just rocks and weeds and stub ends of sumac that is now covered with Kentucky bluegrass and white clover, and it's just a beautiful turf. And I know that 1/2 inch under that soil are piles of rocks. Sheep did that transformation just by rotationally grazing across it. 10 years from now, I figure there'll be soil over the rocks. So, what's the takeaway?
Everybody should be doing something with rotational grazing with some animal. Yes.
Is that little stake that you've been talking about enough to keep cows here?
And we could leave the fence off and they will not touch that fence.
For a period of time.
Yes, yeah, you don't want to test it all the time.
Right.
But it frequently does get left off, and the cows do not touch it.
How about your chickens?
Yes.
Chickens will stay in for electric netting, right? We tend to pasture chickens in a tractor or behind netting, or we'll free range in a small area.
We
But
were
yeah.
doing some, but we were actually finding that they would go up onto the sisters' convent area. That wasn't so good. And the predators were getting them. But once we've done the netting, we have had no predator. Well, we had a hawk, but we have had no predator problem from the outside. No coyotes, nothing has bothered the chickens.
The trick about free-ranging hens in a movable coop that you need to know ahead of time is if they can see your buildings, they're going to focus on your buildings. They're eventually going to want to migrate into the barns, onto your front porch. So when you are moving, when you keep animals in one of those nice coops, it's got the nesting boxes, it's got a little solar thing to close the door. Those are great, but if you want them to live in it, they really need to be far enough away that they can't make it to your outbuildings. Most of us aren't dealing with that much land right now. And you will always have a predator problem with free-range birds unless you can get them reliably under cover at dark.
Okay, so we have a lunch break.
Thank you to Beth and Shawn.
Great.
Yeah.